You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Coming up, Seminole County is looking at a transportation alternative to the Lynx bus system. We'll learn about a plan to use the rideshare model to transport residents. Also, yesterday marked a solemn occasion, the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. We'll hear some of the voices in attendance of a ceremony in Baldwin Park marking the event. But first, Florida's legislative session is scheduled to close tomorrow. A slate of bills still sit before lawmakers, and they've already said they are not going to be finished by Friday's deadline. We're joined by two people who are living and breathing this legislative session. Douglas Soul is WUSF's state government reporter. Kaylee Slattery is an Orlando-based government affairs consultant with the Southern Group Government Affairs lobbying firm. They're following policies passed in Tallahassee. They joined Engage to discuss some of the legislation that could have a significant impact on Central Floridians, including a measure that would allow families of unborn children to sue for pain and suffering. So some lawmakers are pushing forward this legislation to define unborn children and give them legal protections. We've talked about civil liability for the wrongful death of an unborn child, that bill here on Engage. We talked about concerns for patients seeking legal care. We also discussed supporters seeing this as an appropriate way of protecting children. Douglas, I want to start with you. How is this bill being received? What are you seeing?
Thanks for having me on. And so that fetal personhood legislation, it passed out of the House, but it never made it through the complete committee process in the Senate. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be approved by the Senate, as the House has sent that chamber its bill, and the Republican supermajority is a mighty force. But we don't have much time, admittedly, for that to happen. And other measures in the legislature certainly have more momentum. It should be pointed out that that legislation did fail last year. But I also want to emphasize that, we're in the final stretch here, and I've seen surprises happen, and I've seen things that we didn't think were going to pass. So it's kind of a wait and see over the next 24 or 48 hours.
Anything you can point to that stalled the momentum of this bill?
So last year, it failed due to concerns about how it might affect IVF treatments. Now, the House bill that passed specifically says that lawsuits can't be brought against mothers or medical providers, including ones providing IVF treatments. Democrats still oppose the proposal, worrying it could lead to the further restriction of abortion access. I don't know exactly why the Senate hasn't been as supportive. I do know that while Republicans have supported this legislation, I do think, and there's been mentioned, some caution about creating more litigation. So that might be playing a substantial factor in this.
Kaylee, are you seeing any resistance to this bill outside of Democratic lawmakers? What are you seeing?
Basically, and thank you for having me too. Basically exactly what Douglas said. It's kind of all up in the air. I'm not hearing a lot of outside voices, outside of the Democratic and Republican Party that are super against or for the bill. I just don't think it's, right now the Senate doesn't have an appetite for it, and I don't think it's the right time.
I want to move on to another bill that Central Floridians have been paying attention to. And we saw some movement in the House this week on a bill that could loosen restrictions on child labor laws in Florida. 16 and 17-year-olds could work more than 8 hours during the school week without required breaks. What are the business sectors? Which ones are looking for these younger workers, Kaylee?
So as far as I know, and this is a bill that is lovingly referred to as kids in the coal mine. So from what I can tell, the Republican Party is very concerned, as you know, about just the illegal immigration issue and tackling that issue head on. And so I think from what I understand, the bill is coming from the fact that undocumented immigrant workers are taking jobs away from natural-born Americans and citizens. So in that respect, I think the harder that they are on illegal immigrants, it's better for them to be able to put children or just provide more options for different avenues of workers. So, you see that a lot of undocumented immigrants are more into the lower wage jobs. This has really been touted as a potential solution for that gap that will be coming up because ICE is so prevalent just throughout the state, throughout the country. This is supposed to be almost a fix for when that gap becomes too much to bear. Does that mean it's ethically, morally right to be giving children, putting children in these positions? That's up for debate. But I think at the very basis of the argument, that is what the solution they're trying to provide.
Douglas, have you seen any debate over some of those questions that Kaylee just brought up? Have you been seeing that on the floor during the session?
Yeah, so, I mean, when we talk about the floor, it's important to point out that this bill has only made it to the House floor. It passed out of the House last week. And much like the last bill we talked about, the Senate version of this legislation never made it out of the committee process. In fact, it only made it through one of three committees it was assigned. And much like the other bill we talked about, while the Senate could pass something, anything is possible, I'm admittedly not hearing a ton about it right now. I know that even some Republicans mentioned some reservations about this legislation throughout the session. Kind of beyond of what Kaylee said, some supporters of this have argued this is a parental rights issue. A lot of Republicans in the legislature also talk about the skills minors can learn on the job, the money they can bring in, the job vacancies they can fill, etc. Those more wary of the bill, including many Democrats, worry about kids being exploited, and some use the line they want kids to be kids. And, that's even been heard some, as mentioned, by some Republicans.
Kaylee, have you heard any Republicans make that connection that they are looking to fill jobs that are going to be vacated by undocumented migrants?
No, there have not been any Republicans on record that have come out against the bill, especially the sponsor of the Senate bill. Like Douglas said, this did not make it out of the Senate. It's technically just a House bill right now that's gone the furthest. Any Republican that has spoken on the bill will explicitly say this is about trusting parents, not the government, with decisions about their children. If they want their children to work a certain amount of hours, have a job after they get a GED or they graduate high school, this should give them the opportunity to do so, and it should be the parent's choice, especially when it comes into, the homeschooling aspect of the bill. If you're homeschooled, you can work this many hours. That really speaks to the parental rights of our education system in Florida. And as you know, that's been a really hot topic in Florida as of late, especially just the governor is very, very supportive of different education methods and providing Florida families with as many options as possible when it comes to their education.
And one thing I'll add to that is during the Senate process, as mentioned, it didn't get it out of the committee process, but in the bill that was going to the Senate looks a good bit different than the bill that passed the House. But at one interval, Republican Senator Joe Gruters, who's, quite an influential lawmaker, used the line, "I think we need to let kids be kids." So, that might explain some of the lack of movement in the Senate side. Like I said, while I haven't been hearing too much about it in these last days, there's more dramatic back and forths going on right now. Anything can happen, and it's a wait and see.
We're talking with Douglas Soul, WUSF state government reporter, and Kaylee Slattery. She is a lobbyist with the Southern Group's Orlando office. We're here talking about the last week of the regular session happening in Florida now. And one bill before lawmakers that maybe hasn't been as exciting to talk about, but could have a lot of widespread implications, is changing up TDT distribution. We're talking about that tourist development tax that comes from a tax on a hotel stay or some type of short-term rental. You might have heard of it as the bed tax. Kaylee, let me start with you. What are you seeing in terms of where there is opposition to this bill? Is it partisan? Is it geographic?
I think it's really more statewide. I don't think it's necessarily geographic. I mean, there are parts of our state, obviously, as you know, that are collecting more TDT revenue than others. You think your Miamis, your Orlandos, your Jacksonvilles. But I think the opponents of the bill that's in front of us right now, which is House Bill 1221, that's the one that's made it the furthest. The opponents are thinking, a piece of the bill cuts the ability for TDT to be used as promotional and marketing funding for, different organizations that pump out why you should visit Florida, why you should visit Orlando, why you should visit Miami. It's fueled over just visitors coming to the Sunshine State after hurricanes and the pandemic. It's almost, we need organizations to market Florida as a destination, as a tourist destination with all of the different things that we have to offer. But when you cut that entire piece out of, their budget, it's a huge impact. And it's not, it's not, we don't know where it's going to go right now. The Senate companion is 1664. It's kind of stalled in the Senate for right now. The House bill is being picked up, but you have a lot of issues with, the dissolution of TDCs and just different ways that we market Florida and how we get visitors to come to Florida so that they can fulfill that TDT tax. I mean, it's very, to be blunt, we need tourists here because we make a lot of money off of them. And we appreciate having our tourists here, and they pay for a lot of things that are important, like our roads, and they keep our economy flourishing. That is due in part by, in my opinion, the promotion of our state and our different regions. And so that piece of the bill is really, I think, concerning for a lot of people because, as we know, in such a digital age, marketing is so important. And I don't feel like we can do a lot without it.
Kaylee, when we talk about concerns being brought up, I'm wondering if you're hearing also from a sector that is looking to protect the current TDT funding structure. Is that a vocal constituent you're hearing?
Definitely. And I think that constituent is county governments, the very people that collect the TDT tax and use it. And the way that they use it, I don't feel there has been a lot of opposition to the fact that we're collecting the tax. There's more opposition to the way that we're spending the tax. And so I think a lot of those opponents, the opponents of this bill, are the counties and the local governments, rightfully so.
We'll continue our legislative breakdown with Kaylee Slattery of the Southern Group and WUSF's David Soul after the break. We want to hear your thoughts on this session. Which bills are brilliant? Which ones are bunk? You can email us at engage@cfpublic.org, or you can send us a talkback on the free Central Florida Public Media app, or you can send us a text, 833-793-9633. You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. We continue our legislative breakdown with Kaylee Slattery, a lobbyist with the Southern Group, and WUSF's state government reporter, Douglas Soul. So legislative leaders have already said that next year's state budget will not be finished by the end of this session on Friday. Douglas, can you just break down for us, what does an extension look like? I'm wondering if it's restricted to just those budget issues, or could we also see additional policies pass after that regular session ends Friday?
Yeah, a very good question. And there are still a lot of unknowns. The budget is not going to be approved by the end of the regular session. That much is clear. And it's not been announced yet if lawmakers are just going to come back next week to get that done or come back later, maybe later in May or even June. I do know that, the talk right now is that they couldn't come back over the weekend to get anything done. It's graduation weekend, and the lodging here in Tallahassee is bustling and expensive. So, that does leave next week or potentially even later. The budget does need to be passed by lawmakers and signed by the governor by July 1st. So there's a couple months there to work with. Another thing we also don't know, and which you identified, is which policy bills are going to ultimately pass this session. If they don't pass by Friday, they die, but legislative leadership, when they call lawmakers back to Tallahassee for the budget, they could theoretically also add policy proposals to the agenda. I don't know if that would happen. I know lawmakers are trying hard to get what they can done. But, that's just another thing that's up in the air, and that certainly affects that dynamic of these last day conversations.
And I know you've been covering this session, Douglas. Can you speak to what extent this is going to be known as the lawmakers versus the governor's session, where we saw Republicans actually rebuke him?
Yeah, so, even before the regular session, there was what really could be construed as a lawmakers versus governor special session. Now, look, at the beginning of this regular session, legislative leadership and Governor DeSantis were putting a friendly face on their relationship, but things have really devolved between the House and DeSantis in particular. They've slung a lot of criticisms. They've got beef about whether reducing the sales tax or the property tax, or in this case, whether reducing the sales tax or providing a property tax rebate this year is better. The House has investigated DeSantis' administration's spending and Hope Florida, which is a charity program spearheaded by First Lady Casey DeSantis. It's a huge departure from recent years, especially the last few, where the legislature basically walked in lockstep with the governor, and you saw little to no opposition.
Just to follow up with you, Speaker Daniel Perez announced a committee is going to look at property tax reform. Is this the holdup? Is that what is continuing this session, why they can't come to an agreement between the House and Senate?
So it's important to note, there's been kind of a debate between the House and Senate on permanent tax reductions, particularly related to the sales tax. Speaker Perez wants an across-the-board percentage decrease of the sales tax, and Senate President Alberton wants it to be a little bit more targeted. Meanwhile, Governor Ron DeSantis previously called for a one-time property tax rebate. Now, while there's a lot of disagreements between the House and Senate right now, neither of them picked up that property tax rebate. So that's not like a huge driving force, I don't think, in the division of the House and the Senate. I will say in terms of the division between the House and the governor, this sales tax versus property tax debate is a pretty big one, particularly related to that $1,000 rebate that DeSantis wanted to go out by the end of the year. But, in terms of the panel you mentioned, it's also important to point out that reform has to be approved to property taxes by the people of Florida themselves via a constitutional amendment ballot measure. Now, the legislature can put those proposed amendments on the 2026 ballot, and right now Perez is indicating that's what they want to do, but they also want to do it in a careful way. Property taxes fund a lot of local governmental services. So even if they're not, taking up, ultimately, whether they pass a proposed amendment this year or next year, it would still have to appear on that 2026 ballot.
A lot of this, the tax packages for both the House and the Senate are tied up in the budget. So, theoretically, because we don't have a budget, we're not going to know how the tax package works out at the end of the day until they figure out the budget, because everything is so tied up in that. So just like Douglas said, there's still a lot of unknowns.
And just to wrap up, I'd like to ask both of you, the session isn't quite closed yet. What's left on the table as we get closer to the end of session that you're keeping your eyes on? And I'll start with you, Kaylee.
For me, I'm keeping an eye on, obviously, the budget and where lawmakers, are ending up on that. Right now, we don't even have an agreed upon number of what we want the base budget to be. The House has their idea, the Senate has their idea, and the governor early on in the session proposed his annual budget. I'm waiting for that. I'm also waiting for how all of the tax issues are gonna work out. That's because it's all tied up in budget, and the fact that we don't have one, it's all kind of resting on when do we, we're obviously not going to finish on time because the budget was due yesterday. And then if they were to lay it on the table yesterday, would give that 72-hour cooling off period so they could come back on Friday and vote and adjourn. They haven't done that. They've announced, like Douglas said so many times, they won't be here during the weekend. I'm just waiting to see and hear when they'll come back. Will they extend a special session and come back next week, or will they come back after Memorial Day weekend? Will they come back in June, closer to the deadline of that June 30th deadline when the governor has to sign the budget and then it goes into effect July 1? Everything is up in the air. We're all just kind of waiting around. Honestly, there's not a lot of policy debates right now that are being stalled in the way that the budget and the tax package are.
Yeah, and I'll say this, as somebody like many I've talked to in the legislature with a scheduled vacation over the next couple months, I'm also anxiously waiting to hear when the lawmakers are going to come back and figure out this budget. Look, I mean, there's always, or at least usually, surprises in the 11th hour here in the legislative session. If there weren't any, that would be kind of a surprise in and of itself. Beyond the budget, there's a lot of policy proposals I'll be keeping an eye on, as there's a lot of divisions and things that have not yet been figured out, whether it's related to potential restrictions on the Florida Citizens Initiative process or Senate President Albritton's Rural Renaissance package that would provide, economic aid and development opportunities to rural counties. Even as we've talked over the course of this conversation, there's been a back and forth between the House and Senate over that legislation. So whether these big proposals can reach the finish line is of huge importance and a huge unknown right now. So this is kind of a buckle your seatbelt situation right now in the Florida Capitol.
So as we are looking back on this 2025 session, I'll start with you, Kaylee. Who are the winners or who are the losers?
Ultimately, I think the winners of this session are all of the folks that are in the Donald Trump camp and the president himself. I think there were multiple policies that passed. I'll give you an example: the Gulf of America, renaming the Gulf of Mexico. There were a lot of policies that came from the White House, it seems, and the Republican Party that made it through the finish line pretty easily, quickly through session 2. Honestly, the losers this session, this is such a strange session. I feel like we're all losers at one point because we just don't know what's going on. But I mean, getting into the nitty gritty, last week we saw the leader of the Democratic Party, Jason Pizzo, in the Senate Democratic Party, resign and switch his party affiliation. I think one of the main losers of this session is the Democratic Party of Florida. I mean, he was quoted numerous times saying the Democratic Party is dead. I also think, the process itself is a loser in the respect of there's been so many debates on policy, and we still ended the session with no budget. At the end of the day, that is what legislators are constitutionally mandated to. That's the only thing they have to do during session is pass a balanced budget. And we haven't yet. And it's getting to the third hour. We're really kind of slowing down in terms of having hope for a budget. On a lighter note, I think another loser, unfortunately, is the flamingo, the effort to change the state bird from the mockingbird to the flamingo. That's been thrown out a couple sessions now. I think this might be the third session that was filed to change the state bird. As we found out, the hemp industry and all of the regulatory bills and everything they filed to regulate hemp are dead. The House sponsor, Michelle Salzman, has said in so many interviews that she'll come back next year and try again. So along with, all of the Hope Florida probes and the investigation there, and the fact that DeSantis's agency nominees were stalled and not given a Senate appointment, I think that's a pretty comprehensive list of the losers.
So, as a journalist, I want to answer this a little bit more cautiously, and especially considering we have a little bit more time of session left. And even after this session ends, we've got lawmakers coming back in town to at least figure out the budget. And we also don't know what the vetoes are going to look like, and if there are already vetoes, how the legislature is going to respond. But I will say this: if you're a nerd for politics, you're definitely a winner in this session. There's been a lot of drama to follow and a lot of twists and turns. In past years, it's felt like a legislative dynamic was largely, the lawmakers pass something, especially something DeSantis wants. Republicans pass it, Democrats dissent. It was kind of very pattern-like. This session has been a lot more intricate and intense and, very interesting dynamics coming into play. So if you're somebody who subscribes to political newsletters, watches political shows, or just, engages in political content and is interested in any way, there's been a lot to follow, and it's been a wild ride, and I don't think it's close to over.
Douglas Soul, WUSF state government reporter, and Kaylee Slattery, lobbyist with the Southern Group's Orlando office. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Douglas Soul is WUSF's state government reporter. Kaylee Slattery is an Orlando-based government affairs consultant with the Southern Group Government Affairs lobbying firm. This week, Central Florida Public Media is exploring the true costs of commuting in our region through our series, Central Florida Seen and Heard, Costly Commute. When it comes to providing public transportation, it can be expensive for municipalities. Recently, Seminole County announced it's moving away from traditional buses in favor of a ride-sharing, door-to-door service, also known as microtransit. County staff reviewed the Lynx regional transit service currently in place, took time to ride the bus, and evaluated it stop by stop. Commissioner Amy Lockhart joins Engage to discuss the experience and their findings. We talk about projections that this new microtransit service will increase ridership, better serve vulnerable populations, and save at least $9 million a year in the process. Lockhart starts our conversation by describing Seminole County's mass transit system right now.
It's not a mass, it's a mess. From what I have heard from people who ride it, it is cumbersome. It is not terribly reliable. People use it because it's all they have available to them. It takes a very long time to get from one part of town to the other. We've heard what would be a 30-minute car ride can be a 2-hour-long Lynx bus ride. And that's just not okay. If we can do better for less, we should.
So this microtransit involves a system of passenger vans that can hold 6 people. It's a door-to-door on-demand service where you reserve a ride through an app or a call center rather than waiting at a traditional bus stop. As I'm describing it, it sounds like a commercial rideshare. Can you tell me how it's different?
Well, for one thing, all of these services are actually designated federal recipients. They are transit agencies. They are not individual rideshare entities. They are not independent business owners. They are a qualified transit agency. So that is a big difference. They will be subsidized, obviously, by local government and grants, and the funds that we have now coming in to pay for Lynx will also be used to subsidize this service.
And speaking of funding, I would love to ask you a couple questions about cost. How much will this cost the county?
Well, we don't know yet. We have 3 finalist vendors that have responded to the RFP. We are finalizing what it is that we want this to look like, and then those finalists will be able to come back with a clearer view of what it is from a policy perspective that the Board of County Commissioners is looking for. I think our staff took very, very far. They did an excellent job trying to narrow down what it is that we want. And there were just some things that they needed to come back to us, which is what happened at that April 22nd meeting. It was a refinement of that process. So these vendors will come back for another opportunity to really refine and hone in the service that they'll be proposing.
Any sense now of how much Seminole County residents would pay?
Well, we have said as a board that we don't want it to be so costly that those who need the service because they have income issues. They can't afford to take an Uber. They can't afford a Lyft. So we don't want to make it that expensive that those people now are not able to ride it. That's not the intention at all. We also don't believe that Lynx has been charging enough for their routes. They have not done a fare study in quite some time. Fares have stayed the same, I believe, since the 90s. So Lynx needs to raise their fares. We don't want to be as high as an Uber. There's going to be some happy medium. The fabulous thing about all of these companies is that there can be flexibility in these rates. We can determine whether it is by the rider, whatever their qualifications, we may say that students or the elderly or the disabled have a discounted price. Or we could even, through geofencing, allocate, say, if you're going to the health department, that is maybe that's a free ride. If you're going to one of our nonprofit agencies, maybe that's a free ride. So we have so much more flexibility in terms of being able to offer discounts to our riders, to our citizens, that currently we don't have the opportunity to do with Lynx, that we have a sort of have a smorgasbord of options, and we don't know yet which ones we're going to pick. But we have said publicly that we want to make this affordable for those who need it most.
Okay, and I'm hearing you say that the discounts, that could potentially be based on the actual rider and the destination.
Yes, either or both. We haven't picked our vendor yet. And so once we pick the vendor, then we can really start talking about what is most reasonable, what makes the most sense, which populations are in most need of discounts, or maybe we'll be able to price it at a price point initially that we don't have to do that. There's so many questions that remain. It's really hard for me to pin it down for you. And I know you'd love a specific answer, but we just don't have one yet.
Understood. The county's Department of Community Services saw the potential for Seminole County's microtransit system to be beneficial to low-income and homeless populations. Can you explain how that could benefit low-income people and homeless people within the county?
Sure. I think one of the benefits of this type of service is that it will actually be able to, first of all, save people time. You won't have to find your way to a bus stop, wait at a bus stop, and then take hours to get you where you need to go, to only have to do the same thing in reverse. So if you're a single parent who is relying on childcare and you need to pay an additional several hours of childcare under the current system, you won't have to do that anymore. Someone will come and pick you up at your home, take you to your job or wherever it is that you're going, doctor appointment, and then you can schedule a trip back. The number of hours that this is going to cut out of people's commutes is just immeasurable at this point. I think that will be one of the biggest game changers right now.
Do you think this system has the potential to encourage more people to use public transit, more riders than you're seeing currently?
Yeah, I hope it will. One of the things that we have seen and heard quite a bit about Sunrail, because let's not forget, these two are very much interconnected. When people say, well, I would use Sunrail, but I don't want to wait on the Lynx bus for an hour to get there, or the time doesn't match up for me to be able to get to the stop or to get home. This will allow very specific syncing. So if you know that you need to be at the Sunrail station for an 8:30 train, you can schedule that ride that will come pick you up at your home and they will take you to the Sunrail station. That is something we don't have right now, because you would have to get your way to a bus and then get the timing of that bus and then get to the Sunrail station. So the number of steps that it will take will be greatly reduced. We think it will drive more people to utilize Sunrail. We think it will drive more people to use public transportation. There was a woman at our Lynx board meeting this past week who was disabled. And she shared with me first until she realized I wasn't a Lynx staff member, and I put her in contact with someone who was. But she shared that her current situation with her current disability, she felt very uncomfortable riding on such a large, she was vision impaired, riding in such a large bus, not really fully aware of what's going on around her. And I think something like this would be much more secure. It certainly would make people feel much safer in a smaller environment. It's just a completely different dynamic than what we have now.
Commissioner Lockhart, how do you prevent this system from being used as a rideshare like an Uber or Lyft versus a public transit system that these people are relying on, they need to go to work?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that we've talked about. And I think the potentially dynamic pricing could be a part of that. We're going to listen to other communities around the country who have instituted this. We're not the first ones to do this. We're probably in the middle of the pack. There are quite a few earlier adopters that have been doing this for years. So we're going to learn from them about how it works. And if we see that there seems to be an overutilization that requires us to either bring more cars into the fleet or move cars around, we'll be able to work with our private sector partners to modify whatever needs to be modified.
When I'm thinking about Central Florida's reputation, it's not really for having a great public transportation system. And you mentioned looking at other systems. Are there any municipalities here or elsewhere that you think are getting it right?
Well, we know that there are municipalities, especially in South Florida, who utilize this system quite successfully. Arlington, Texas has also been using it quite successfully. So we know that it is being done. I have not personally studied their models, but I know our staff has been very diligent about making sure that we are comparing apples to apples.
Why is public transit so difficult to get right?
Well, it's expensive. And I think you will always have people who are not going to ride it just based on their personal needs. You know, when I was a mom with 2 kids and I had to get to school and get them to baseball practice and get them to cheerleading, and I'm not hauling all that gear on a bus, right? So depending on where you are in your life and what your needs are as a family, it's going to dictate how many people utilize it. And utilization is one of the biggest keys to helping to fund it. So it's always a balancing act. And whether we like it or not, public transportation is always going to be subsidized by taxpayers. It is not going to pay for itself. I know that there are plenty of folks who think, well, we shouldn't have it unless it pays for itself. Well, that's just not the reality of how public transit works. I think we need to be diligent about making sure that pricing is fair so that you don't have a disproportionate number of taxpayers who aren't using the service greatly subsidizing those who are. I think there's a balance there that we need to find. But right now, we don't have any control over the services that are provided here in Seminole County. This will give us the ability to make sure that we can deliver the best service that our citizens need and tailor it for our community and control the pricing. We can't do that right now. So we're excited. I think the really important thing for folks who rely on mass transit to get to work, to get childcare, to get to medical appointments, we are not going to leave you stranded. We are going to make sure that you have the know-how, you have the tools and the resources to start utilizing this new system. So I understand change is scary again, but we're going to do the very best that we can to make sure that this is as smooth a transition as possible. We won't leave people stranded.
That was Seminole County Commissioner Amy Lockhart. The board is still evaluating their options and hasn't settled on a micro-transit company. The plan does not entirely eliminate Lynx buses. Some of those main routes on major roads like 436 and 1792 would stay in service. We did reach out to Lynx for a comment, but did not hear back. We'll dive deeper into transit and what it takes to build a regional transportation system that works for everyone on May 8th at the Art and History Museums of Maitland. I'll be moderating our live panel discussion to shed light on the pressing issues of commuting in Central Florida. You can reserve your spot now on our website, cfpublic.org, and while you're there, you can see our full series of Central Florida seen and heard costly commute stories. Coming up this week is the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon and the start of the Vietnamese American community. Next on Engage, we visit the special ceremony and learn how this community has shaped Central Florida's social, cultural, and business landscape. You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. A long and sordid chapter of American history was closed on April 30th, 1975, when the Communist forces of North Vietnam overtook Saigon, then the capital of South Vietnam. Those images of American personnel and South Vietnamese allies crowding helicopters on the roof of the American embassy is a symbol of the failure of 10 years of foreign policy in Southeast Asia that cost the lives of 57,000 American servicemen and an estimated 1 million Vietnamese lives. For the people of Vietnam, it marked the end of a country they loved and the beginning of an oppressive communist regime. Following the war, efforts were made by the American government to relocate refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia to the United States. Central Florida became a nexus for relocation, and Orlando saw its Vietnamese population grow from 1,100 residents in 1975 to more than 10,000 today. Now Orlando's Vietnamese community is a vibrant cultural and business community, helping to define the identity of the Mills 50 Business District. Members of the region's Vietnamese community gathered yesterday at Veterans Memorial Park in the Baldwin Park area of Orlando to remember the day their country was taken from them and honor the memory of the soldiers and civilians who died during the Vietnam War. Tong Nguyen Cook Phu Shi fled Vietnam after Saigon's fall. She talked about why this day is an important reminder of why she came to America and how the history is passed on to new generations.
50 years ago, we had lost a lot of people that tried to flee the country. We die on the ocean, in everywhere. So it's a big change. So we just use this 50 years for the remark of all the of Vietnam.
How do you talk about this to younger generations?
We do have certain school or to some area that we talk about our memory. And most of them understand, some of not, they're too young to be, know or anything. But the second generation, the one that come here when they were young, they know. Yeah.
What do people not realize, or what do you wish people knew more about in terms of the impact of the Vietnamese American community here in Central Florida?
You mean the Vietnamese impact?
Just in Orlando, in Central Florida.
Well, we all appreciate the American, the country and the people that open your arm to welcome us in the 75.
Số thịt bán đón chỗ cơ cơ mà đại diện là vụ bom nổ và chưa bom hết.
I'm sorry. And the people that live there, in that age, that we know how the communists are, how are they killing people, and the Tate offense, 1968, they killed thousand people. So that's why we have to free a country that luckily that American people that open their arm to welcome us, to let us sit in here. Most of us are very successful now because all of you, all this second generation now, they be doctor, lawyer, and everything, and their children is the one that we need to educate them, of the free Vietnam, how they live in there. And I think that we try our best, but this is just more the culture that we have to remember every year.
Can you think of any local landmarks or areas of Orlando that really represent that legacy of Vietnamese American here?
I think this is right here. This is the landmark that make us proud of Vietnam, and we also use this opportunity to appreciate the 56,000 Americans that died in our country.
Dr. Helen Toi Dong Vo arrived in the United States in 2006 at the age of 17. Today, she's an anesthesiologist practicing in Central Florida. She spoke with producer Richard Copeland about how she came to live in Orlando and the adjustments she had to make in her new home.
My uncle was one of the boats people. My family belonged to the old Saigon before 1975. So after 1975, we're really poor. So my uncle was in medical school, but he's like, well, you know what? We need money. We need food. So he left, escaped on a boat in 1980. And he made it to America in 1982 because he was 2 years in Hong Kong. And then he started a process to bring us over. But it took him like 20 years to actually brought us over because my dad's just a brother, and then it took longer. So we waited 20 years after he left to actually made it to America in 2002 to kind of unite the family.
Well, so talk about that first day, your first arrival. What was your first? What was your memory? What stuck out to you?
So the first day, the first time I got off the plane, my first impression was like, everything was huge. I was like, why is everything so big here? Even the moon was huge. The road was huge. And then they had car. There was no moped. And the street was so clean. It's just an eye-opening. Like, you hear about it. You saw it on TV. But when you actually experience it, it's a totally different feelings. Like, wow, this is heaven. Like, this is heaven on earth that everybody was referring to. And here I am. I actually made it after 17 years that my parent was waiting, because we were supposed to came in 1992, but then they changed the process and made us wait 10 more years. So it took us a very long time to finally came in 2002 to see my uncles again and my grandpas and, my aunts. Everybody has been here for 20 years. And we finally made it. So that was very emotional, meeting my uncle for the first time. He's the one that left and then brought us over here.
The gathering was bittersweet. Old friends reuniting, sharing stories of the Vietnam they recalled before the war, combat veterans, both South Vietnamese and American, remembering fallen brethren and sharing memories, as many tears as smiles. And at the end of the ceremony, all gathered to eat together. Every show, we ask you to engage with us. Last week, we talked about Rockledge Hospital closing and the impact it will have on the Brevard County community that lost a crucial emergency department. Janine wrote us, quote, I have several severe health issues, one of which is heart-related, so the closing of this hospital is extremely concerning. She goes on to say, we are in an area of Brevard that any additional time it takes to get to a hospital could be life-threatening. We also heard from Sharon, a 67-year-old woman with a heart condition, diabetes, and high blood pressure. She wrote, I am truly scared for my health. No medical care for at least 30 minutes away from where I live in Cocoa. I don't even understand everything that's going on. We're talking about calling 911. Where are they going to take you? Is it going to be a flip of a coin? You're going to go to Titusville? You're going to go to Melbourne? You're going to go to Cape Canaveral? You're going to Viera? Thank you, Janine and Sharon, for engaging with us. We want to hear from more people. Let us engage with you. What do you want to hear more about? What do you want to talk about? Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org, or you can send a talk back on the free Central Florida Public Media app, or you can text 833-793-9633. That is all for today's edition of Engage. I'm Sharon Stone. Thank you for joining us. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.